Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me. I'm Hillary Raimo, your host for the next hour right here on Achieve Radio. Well, I'm excited to have you here. I have to admit that I have been off the air for a couple weeks, just kind of hanging out, getting myself some good old, well-deserved rest and relaxation. And it's a pleasure to be back here. And my guest tonight is no stranger to my show. She has joined me on the air. I have lost track, actually. She's been here so many times for over the past almost 5 years now. And every time she comes, she brings in such a powerful frequency, and she shares some of the most enlightened information that you will find available anywhere on the internet. Barbara Clow is an internationally acclaimed ceremonial teacher. She's a Mayan calendar researcher, and she's the author of several books, including The Mayan Code, The Pleiadian Agenda, Alchemy of Nine Dimensions, and The Liquid Light of Sex. And she has just re-released a new version of Catastrophobia called Awakening the Planetary Mind, Beyond the Trauma of the Past to a New Era of Creativity. I can't think of a better subject to discuss tonight. And we are just passing this fabulous full moon, this wonderful energy. I don't know if you felt it this week or not, but I certainly have. And it has been very inspiring, and it's also been very challenging in some ways, too. I'm sure you're all feeling it in your own way. But I'm very excited to have her back here, as I've already said, but I can't say it enough because she's just so wonderful. So pull up a chair and listen very closely, because everything she comes here to say will just open your mind and expand your consciousness and bring in something new, hopefully. Welcome, Barbara. Thanks so much for being here again.
Hi, Hillary, and I'm glad to be back again. This is fun.
It is fun. It's always fun when you come on. So I'm going to jump right to it, because I know that we can fill a whole hour with this fabulous information. But before we start, where have you been? What have you been up to? What's new in your life? And are you writing? Are you sharing? How are you working in 2012?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. Awakening the Planetary Mind just came out a couple of months ago. So, of course, I'm actively promoting that and teaching it, running around and lecturing and doing interviews naturally. And then the other thing that I'm actually doing three things. The second thing I'm doing is something that I think everybody out there is doing. We're adjusting to the end of the Mayan calendar and being in an entirely new field on this planet. And I'm finding it to be very, very challenging and very, very creative. And then the third thing I'm doing in light of all this wonderful creativity is I'm writing a novel, which is the first book in a trilogy. I got sick of so many. I finally finished my work in terms of footnotes and bibliography and all of the more complex levels that I've had to go to. And so now I'm having fun playing in world of fiction, and it's really freeing for me to do that.
Very exciting. When do you suppose it'll be out?
I don't know. It's interesting. With a novel in particular, I wouldn't think of even doing anything with it till the first one was actually finished. And so I'm just deeply immersed in it. I seem to be transmitting a record, because I sit down and one chapter comes in it takes 3 hours. Every chapter so far of 7, it took exactly 3 hours to bring it in, and then 3 hours to clean it up. And so all I have to do is just sit down, and it just comes right in, which is interesting. So I don't know what that means. I can't assess it right now, but most importantly, I'm having fun. And I think all of us right now, it's very important right now to really target our energy and to really decide exactly what we want to do at this point, because this field is just so creative and so filled with new energy. We've got to grab it, you know.
Well, the way you say that, I'm sure, is definitely clicking with a lot of people listening, because we can all feel it in whatever way we feel it, and it's what we do with it, right? It's not about running around in this state of chaos and bumping heads with everybody. It's about using it to transform that energy into an act of creative love for the planet. So let's talk about the Awakening the Planetary Mind. Should we jump right into it? How did you come about to rewriting Catastrophobia, and why now?
Yeah. Catastrophobia came out in 2001, and it was my response to being a teacher for about 12 years at that point, teaching various higher consciousness methods. And through my process of teaching, I kept on asking myself the same question over and over again. I could see how potentially evolved people could be, and yet I could see how far they were from where I felt they could be, and I could see what a struggle it was for people as they were waking up and as they were attempting to initiate themselves and everything. And so I decided at that point to transmit the records that came from my Cherokee grandfather, Hand. And my grandfather, Hand, had, as a child, basically from like age 3 for me until I was 17, and then he died. He was my teacher, and he was a Cherokee record keeper. And so he transmitted the whole story of the ancient times to me, the story of a great cataclysm that occurred 11,500 years ago, 12,000 years ago. And a lot of people already have heard about this idea of the destruction of the world, because it's the same idea as the fall of Atlantis. And so my grandfather basically said that a time would come when we would have the science that would describe this catastrophe, as well as the mythology and the stories that he had and so many of the other indigenous keepers had. And so my time came to transmit that, and that came out as Catastrophobia in 2001. And then Awakening the Planetary Mind has come through now in 2011, because first of all, it's a completely new book. It uses some of the data from Catastrophobia, because that's necessary in order to tell the story. But the real issue would have to do with looking at human consciousness over 100,000 years. Awakening the Planetary Mind actually covers a huge span of time. And Catastrophobia more or less covered about 15 to 20,000 years. And so in Awakening the Planetary Mind, the basic gist of it is I went back before the cataclysm and attempted to recover who we were before the thing happened, because we actually were a very advanced global maritime civilization at that time. We were a very highly developed species, not technological, but psychically developed, and we were very much a healed species of people. And so basically, I brought the book in now because I tell what the field would be like at this time. Because of my work with Carl Johan Kalaman, I had a feeling that things would really be intense in late 2011, early 2012, and I think you'll agree they certainly are. This book is really targeted, it took a good aim at what's going on right now.
Do you think that, not to get off topic, but do you think that teachers, that people who have spent a long period of time out in the world teaching the healing arts are especially feeling it? Do you think that there's what's your thoughts on the energy that people who've been doing healing work for a long time are feeling now?
Yeah, in some cases they seem to be feeling it very, very intensely. It's almost like we all thought we kind of knew what this would be like, and we kind of prepared ourselves for it. But now that it's finally here, it's so much bigger and so much more intense than I think any of us imagined that it would be. So you could make a case for the idea that people who are really involved at an intense teaching level are feeling things very, very intensely. And also, we're feeling it through the people we work with, because a lot of people are in crisis. A lot of people are having a terrible struggle at this time. And since we exist to be there for them, then of course we're feeling a lot of what they're feeling.
Interesting. So where are we right now? In your opinion, where are we? What are we doing? What's going on specifically today, right in the middle of everybody's life going on?
Well, what's strange about it, as it turned out, Carl Kalaman really was right about the end date of the calendar. We can see that by a lot of the events that happened in 2011. The issue during 2011 was whether there would be an increase in time acceleration and therefore events during 2011, and if 20 times as much. And as far as I can tell from observing it very carefully, that is exactly what happened. So what happened last year is remember what it was like? It just never stopped. Another country getting rid of its dictator, another crisis like the quake and tsunami, another financial crisis. It was just pounding us, and we also were all experiencing it in our own families, with different family members being affected by it. And then all of a sudden, at the end of October, it's like a line of energy just went flat. Do you know what I mean? Something else is going on. Like, for example, in the financial markets, you hardly ever hear anything at this point about what's going on with the markets from day to day. They're almost completely flat. They're hardly going up or down. Suddenly, the crisis in Europe has really, really calmed down to a great degree. And I'm not saying problems are going away. I'm just saying that we're seeing a lot of signs that a lot of people who are in power and who are supposed to know what they're doing don't have any idea. Watching the Republican debates has been interesting, and the Republican convention, the Republican presidential choosing a candidate has been really bizarre, because you see really men who apparently were intelligent before now just not knowing what they're doing. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And so it's a time of deep questioning. And the question is, like, with this kind of energy, what do you do? That's really the central issue. And I think it's extremely important to slow way down. We've been saying this, you and me, for a couple of years now, but now it's like you can't just frantically jump to the next idea. Like, you can't just say, oh, nothing's going on, so now I'll just do this today. You need to slow down and tune in at a deeper level, because the really amazing thing about our environment right now is that the heart is opening on a very profound level. Each one of us has access to the knowledge of the heart to a degree that we really have not had before. And at the same time, very, very high spiritual forces are moving into the planet. They're moving into every corporation. They're moving into every country. They're moving into every sacred site. And slowly but surely, things just don't happen overnight, as you know. They have to happen in stages. And things are really shifting to another order. And I think it's an order that all of us are going to be a lot more comfortable with. But the transition is very difficult.
Now, the last few times that you've come on the show, you've talked about specific places of where we are in the calendar. Now, do you feel that we've already surpassed the end of it, and so now we're kind of in this floating womb where we can create from our own space and intention, or do you feel that the calendar is still affecting us?
Yeah, I think we're acting, each one of us now is acting as an individual creative agent. Before that, those underworlds, those 9 underworlds, starting 16.4 billion years ago, were moving in a revolution and moving us constantly to a more developed stage of consciousness. And some of those stages were not necessarily seemingly that developed. Like the 7th underworld is 1755 through 2011. It's the industrial underworld. And on the very day of the beginning of the 9th underworld, which was March 9th last year, suddenly we had that quake and tsunami, and we had those incredible images of all of that detritus of the industrial world just washing over the roads and land in Japan. It was just incredible. And so the planetary underworld, in many ways, was the creation that happened during the planetary underworld wasn't all that positive, because now we have a huge garbage dump to deal with. We have a huge transformation and transmutation that we're going to be experiencing. And so the only answer for that is the individual responsibility of each person.
And each person is meant to do what at this time specifically?
Yeah, and I know, Hillary, you've been really interested in sacred sites, and you've been really interested in the land works. And another thing that's going on right now is the land itself, any country or any part of the planet is waking up, and the sacred site energy is waking up, and the power of the earth is waking up. And so each one, it is really only each person can read, if you think about it. It's not something that really works very with the kind of structures that we've developed. I think what we're going to see coming pretty soon is people gathering together and creating structures that are more like the way we used to do it before the cataclysm 1,000 years ago. Because as you know, people used to go to sacred sites, and they used to carry out ceremonies, and they used to work with the land in a really conscious and intentional way. And I think that that's coming back, but I think that call comes from within each one of us to know how to respond to this.
Well, I was curious if you had heard yesterday in the headlines that in Russia they had actually drilled through 2.2 miles of glacial ice, and they had reached into Lake Vostok. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mm-hmm. And what I found interesting, and I thought I'd bring up on the show tonight, I wrote an article about this yesterday and posted it. For those of you who are interested, you can go to my website and you can find my blog and you can read it. But what I thought was interesting for tonight's show was that this water is 15 to 34 million years old, and it hasn't seen the light of day in that particular amount of time. And so the reason it's still liquid is because of something to do with the friction of how the glacial ice is. I'm not quite sure. You can read about it in the article, links that I posted. And so they have actually breached that, and now they've made contact. So what I kept visualizing was this fantastic bridging of time. I mean, we're talking 15 to 34 million, because they're not quite sure in what time, where that is, but that's just a rough estimate. But that's still a tremendous amount of time. And if you think about the essence that water holds, and the whole symbolism of, the man drilling down into the woman's womb and all of this beautiful, energy being released and healing. For me, it sounded like a great healing, and that's the perspective I took when I wrote about it. Of coming back into our past and releasing the trauma. And then I looked at the title of your book, and of course I knew it before tonight's show, and I said, oh, there it is, Beyond the Trauma. And so I think a lot of people really do, they're stuck on this kind of information train. There's so much information that people have access to, Barbara, that I think a lot of them are overwhelmed and they forget. Sometimes we have to kind of regroup and think about what we're doing with that information and how we're living that information forward and how we're using it, and what's the symbolism in it. And instead we just get stuck on the facts, But what are your thoughts on this bridging, this beautiful symbolic act of breaching that kind of water with so much age to it?
Yeah, of course, I'm waiting anxiously to see what they actually discover, because they've been actually working on this for a number of years, and a lot of the work that the scientists have done on this is to create a technology that can't disturb the barrier between the water that's under Antarctica and then the surface. In other words, I have taken responsibility, as far as I can tell, for not contaminating it so that they can study it. But I don't really think we have any idea what they're going to find out, because one of the pieces of information that's in Awakening the Planetary Mind is the issue of whether Antarctica was ice-free before the cataclysm. There's a discussion in the book about the possibility that the ice covered the poles only 11,500 to 12,000 years ago, because one of the theories in Awakening the Planetary Mind, and this isn't my theory, I'm dealing with the theories of a whole group of scientists. I'm not a scientist, these aren't my theories. But one theory that I discuss in great detail is the possibility that the poles only tilted 11,500 years ago. In other words, before this cataclysm, that the Earth was actually basically vertical. And if that was the case, then there would probably not have been ice on the poles. So another thing that could happen here with this drilling going on and this exploration is a discovery of a continent, Antarctica, which may have been the main continent of Atlantis. There are some geographers who think that, based on old maps, that actually Antarctica was actually the Atlantean kingdom. There were satellites all over the place on the planet, like in the Caribbean and probably in the Mediterranean. There were Atlantean kingdoms that actually we have historical descriptions of. But that's what disappeared 11,500 years ago. So this exploration may have something to do with the reawakening of the planetary mind, the good old title that one of the people at the publisher came up with that title. And I really like it a lot because I think it describes this nascent birthing quality of our times right now. And I'd like to put another one in there, Hillary, the really big whammy as far as I'm concerned. As you know, I've written a number of books, and one strain of thought that I work with comes from the Pleiadian agenda, which then became Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. The Pleiadian agenda is the channeled inversion, which came through in the fall of 1994 and then spring of 1995. And then because the material that came through me from the Pleiades was so scientific, it covers quantum mechanics and superstring theory and all kinds of advanced sciences, and because I didn't understand science when the information came through me, which actually was a really good thing, I realize now, because I didn't tweak it, and I didn't mess around with the information that came in because I didn't understand it. I just let it come, you know. And then after doing 10 years of analysis of it, I wrote Alchemy of Nine Dimensions in 2004. And then so much more information came in that I wrote a new version of Alchemy in 2010. I've kind of put myself into these fields that are growing fast right now. And so I've been forced to take my own books and rewrite them because the information's coming in so fast. So here's the big whammy. Back in the fall of 94, 95, when the information came through me and I channeled it, Edward Witten did the mathematical calculations for superstring theory. And superstring theory is a mathematical and physical system that looks at the possibility that we live in a universe of 9 and 10 dimensions, and only 3 of those are extended, which means only 3 of those are solid, which, for instance, we're in the 3rd dimension, and this is a solid dimension. And so the interesting thing about that material coming through me is it came through me at exactly the same time Edward Witten described superstring theory, which I really took note of at the time. So then over the years, the Pleiadians kept saying that superstring theory would be discovered and proven at the end of the Mayan calendar. And back in those days, I didn't know what the end of the Mayan calendar was until 2005. I thought it was 2012, just like a lot of people do at this current moment. And so I was watching, since I now believe that the calendar ended October 28, 2011, I was really watching in December to see if anything would happen. And the most incredible thing about this kind of revelation that I've been experiencing in this lifetime is that superstring theory was proven mathematically. The announcement of the mathematical discovery was December 23rd, 2011. And a group of Japanese mathematicians working with a gigantic computer did the mathematical calculations for 10 dimensions. And then at the same time, in the particle accelerator at the Large Hadron Collider, the scientists there discovered have discovered the Higgs boson, which is a particle that proves the existence of the Higgs field. And this is very complicated, but the Higgs field is simply a field of immanence that matter is created out of. But it's been a theoretical idea until last December. And in the calculator, the evidence for the Higgs boson, they haven't definitively announced that they really have got it all nailed down. But basically, they've decided that they've discovered it. Now, it's incredible to me that something that comes through, a mother of four working at a publishing company back in 1994, it's incredible to me that it would turn out to be true, And then the implications of this are absolutely, totally stunning. And it's really easy to explain what that is. All you have to do is realize that 100 years ago, we discovered quantum mechanics and the quantum world. And because of the discovery of the quantum world, we now have televisions and BlackBerries and all this incredible technology. It's all coming from the discovery of the quantum. Well, now that they have discovered superstring theory, the next thing that's going to happen in our world is we are going to start having technologies that are based on multidimensionality. And we're going to start living in a world where multidimensional consciousness is actually more solid and more extended and more part of the fabric of our reality. And this is going to happen. It's going to happen for sure.
Well, I believe it.
Yeah, because just like the quantum, you couldn't hold all those companies from taking those discoveries on the part of scientists and making technologies out of them and making a lot of money off of it. I mean, this is going to be the next renaissance, the next breakthrough. And so, on one hand, a lot of us are feeling like we're at a really kind of terrible endpoint in a way, because we're in the middle of all this garbage. You know, these underworlds just created this incredible materialization. The 5,125-year-long underworld created civilization, which started 3000 BC. Then industry, starting 1755. Then the galactic underworld is a technological underworld, and so we have this just overwhelming pile of technological gadgets littering the backs of yards in the villages in India. And we have to handle these things. This is going to be the next thing, is handling that incredible litter, because we're on the verge of becoming less material. And we can see that by the discovery of superstring theory.
Barbara, I want to go back to a second when you were talking about being a mother of four and having all of this information come through. I've been hearing a lot of that. I've also been experiencing a lot of that myself. Do you feel that women are being activated by the star beings, by the Pleiadians, by all the other beautiful life forms that love us? That do they come through women and activate women this way, and then men go out and find the scientific meaning to it? What's the dance that we do as women?
It's a great comment, because historically, as we all know, that the oracles have been women and the prophetesses have been women. So historically, the biggest majority of seers and prophets and channels and all that were women. That's just a fact. And then as the patriarchy got stronger and stronger and stronger, this energy coming through women was more suppressed. But now the suppression of women has been ending. I mean, it's been ending over a period of 50 to 100 years, but it's really, really powerful now. And so the women are all we're doing really is doing what we always did, but we're being suppressed. And that means that we'll have breakthroughs in medicine and healing, ways of living. Women are a lot more, like, for example, the big crisis during the, let me backtrack a little bit. The ninth underworld started March 9th, 2011, and it ended October 28th. So the last and final underworld was last year. And the very first day of it was the quake and tsunami in Japan. And that event is much, much more than an earth change and a catastrophe. That event is the beginning of the ending of the use of nuclear power, because nuclear power is not a viable or functional choice on this planet. We have to have other sources of energy. Women in the long run are going to be more patient, and they're going to be less likely to just continually do the same over and over and over again that everybody knows is destructive, if you see what I mean. So I think we're not suppressed, because we're the mothers of the children and we're the protectors,
And how does that change the role of the man?
Well, because I've got a great husband, and we talk about this kind of stuff all the time. And men have their own beauty and their own skills, and they've been manipulated. While we were suppressed, women, they were manipulated into being warriors. And if you watch the scene that we're living in the middle of right now, you can see a lot of evidence that war is coming to an end. Now that you have to watch. I mean, I have to watch out, because what is going on with warfare is the development of all these bizarre technology, like the drones and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of really bad stuff going on. But on the other hand, here we have the Americans are finally out of Iraq, and the timelines on moving out of Afghanistan are moving up. And suddenly we hear that the embassy in Iraq is being cut in half and stuff like that. And to tell you the truth, what's happening is our planet is running out of resources to be used and wasted in warfare. And so I forget what your question. What was the question?
Just go with it, Barbara. Just go with it. You're doing great.
No, but I mean, you asked me a specific question.
Well, the men.
I know. It was about men, and so for men, as warfare, their job right now is to transmute warfare. It really is, because they're the primary creators of this form of organized aggression. And judging by the kind of fields that are coming to the planet, see, a really high energy is coming to the planet Earth now. And you can feel it, can't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know. And so then we have to receive it. And each one of us has to do something with it. And I think you're going to see men not even necessarily knowing what they're doing. I watched the Super Bowl this year. I usually try to watch that just to check into the planetary fields. The energy in the Super Bowl was totally flat this year, almost as if the men didn't have any heart for doing it anymore. It was really interesting.
Interesting observation.
It was. Yeah, I watch stuff like that.
Well, I have been going back and forth with people and discussing Madonna's halftime show. And I, in fact, wrote another article about that right before I wrote about the lake, and how she, a lot of people are going on and on about all the Illuminati symbolism and all of this stuff. And finally, I actually didn't see it, because during halftime I was, checking emails and working a little bit, and then went back to watch the game. And the next day, I was having these conversations, and they said, "Didn't you see what happened?" And I said, "Well, no, I was just taking a look at some pictures people had posted and hadn't had a chance to watch the YouTube video yet." And finally, when I did, what I realized was she was really almost enacting the male and female energies, the awakening of the great Madonna, the great woman. Yeah. And then how that energy just, kind of spread out into world peace. And so it really inspired me to write an article that, a lot of people have been very, receiving very well. But it was just, for me, it was not about the darkness. It was not about the Illuminati. It was not about Satanism. It wasn't about any of that stuff. It was like I had to look right through it and watch it without any kind of prejudgments. And, and so she even she had said a few days before on Anderson Cooper that she was coming to deliver a sermon, and she was, in the Holy of Holies. That the Super Bowl for most people was the Holy of Holies, so she had to really deliver. And then she came and she did this in what she considered the Holy of Holies. And what I saw was an activation of women. If women were watching this, then they were activated in a sense, unconsciously perhaps. And then, she was pissed off.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I was really moved by it, and this is something that's really going to amuse you, I think. But Donna comes from a place that's about 7 miles away from where I grew up. She comes from Bay City, Michigan, and I come from Saginaw, Michigan. And we're right next to each other on the Saginaw River. And I've always had a really, really potent resonance with her. I feel like she's just the embodiment of the goddess. And I thought what she did at the Super Bowl was magnificent.
Interesting. That is interesting. Yeah, and women are connecting to that vision of seeing it that way instead of going into the dark and the negative. I mean, think about it. What better way, because we are so TV bound. The Super Bowl is watched by, a gazillion people. And you have all of this stuff focused right there. And she went in there and she delivered a very strong and powerful initiation.
Right in the center. Yeah, right in the center. And then another thing, I know you're familiar with my 9-dimensional system.
Yes.
And the 4th dimension is the canopy of energy that's over, what I use is a picture of a person on a triangular table, and then there's a canopy over them. And then all of the 5 upper dimensions move into the canopy. So it's like an arc of energy, like over our bodies. And the 4th dimension is the dimension of dark and light, and it's the dimension, the archetypal realm. And it's the dimension where all of our feelings, we're all connected in the 4th dimension through our feelings. So the whole planet is all connected out by our thoughts and our spiritual aspirations and our feelings and everything. And I think the reason that what Madonna did was so powerful at the Super Bowl was she was really right there in the 4th dimension, the very center between dark and light. because that's the way it works on our planet. That's the way energy works. Energy is positive and negative, and you can't really break through into the higher levels of consciousness unless you're really harmonized and really balanced at that fourth dimensional level. And I watched that whole thing really, really carefully, and I saw her functioning at that fourth dimensional dark and light level, and yet there was a really high energy coming out of her all the way through the performance. It was beautiful.
Well, I'm glad you agree.
Yeah, and it really changes. This sort of thing really changes planetary fields, because whenever you can pull, the reason I watch some of these mass events is whenever you can pull a lot of people together with their minds and their consciousness, there's a tremendous potential for changing the world itself.
So if we miss that and we focus on the other things that are of just a darker vibrational energy, how does that change our own delivery of energy to the field? I mean, the answer might seem obvious.
Yeah,
but,
each one of us, I think, needs, and I think everybody who's listening to this knows this, we all constantly observing just exactly where are we regarding this whole dark and light field. Like I did a lecture on Tuesday night on awakening the planetary mind to about 400 or 500 people in Vancouver. And the minute you get a big crowd like that, there's always a tremendous potential for creativity or a disaster. You know, it's just the way things work. And so when I'm looking at that level, I'm working very shamanically and very, very carefully. And I could see, this is one of the first big events I've done since the calendar ended. And I could really see, right in the room, I could see those kind of dark and light energies moving all over the place. And then what happens with those is it's up to people to make up their minds. Every person has to make a decision about this. Are you with the light or are you with the darkness? Every day of your life you're going to live with both energies, if you know what I mean. But where are you? And I think that the one definitive statement I could make, positive statement, about the end of the Mayan calendar is, you know that image I use all the time for 9 dimensions, the person on the table on a triangle, and then the canopy over them, and then the lines of light coming into them. It's an issue of, like, where are we in the middle of these dimensions? And I think that since the calendar ended and the time acceleration stopped, I think we've been thrown very profoundly into our 9-dimensional model. Now, this means in the short run that people feel, it means that we all feel like 10 times as many things are going on in your life. And yet, at the same time, what's bizarre about it is sometimes it feels like there's absolutely nothing going on. Do you know what I mean? Have you been feeling that? It's the strangest thing. And I'm just, what I'm doing with it is I work with the model, so I'm lucky to be a person who developed it, and therefore I'm proficient at working with it. So I've been really working with it. And what I'm noticing is that the reason sometimes you feel nothing's going on is because you're in a higher dimension. You see, when you get into those higher dimensions, then you don't have the kind of constant events going off one after another that you get we're in the 3rd dimension. That's just the basic system here. And what goes on all day is we get in our cars and we go to work and we do whatever we're doing. And there's all these events happening all the time. But the minute you start moving up into these higher dimensions, there's less events, things are less solid, and things function differently. And so I think the reason we're having this weird combination of feeling like a million things are going on all at the same time, and then suddenly this sense of almost like a sense of nothingness. And I'm finding that attempting to understand which dimension seems to be affecting things is actually helping me a lot. Like I'll give you a good example. I ran into an emotional situation recently between a mother and a child. And I was so overwhelmed with heart energy that I almost had a heart attack. I mean, literally. I mean, the physical symptoms were happening. But I went, oh, I get it. I'm in the 5th dimension with her, and that's fine, but that doesn't mean my heart has to have a heart attack. That's my trip, you know what I mean? And I've been having exquisite experiences with the 6th dimension, because the 6th dimension is the realm of geometry, and that's the dimension that creates everything down here by means of geometrical laws. And so when you go into the 6th dimension, that's when you can expand into all kinds of higher levels, and you can go grow into different forms. You can be a triangle, you can be a square, an icosahedron, or whatever. And I'm finding that I can almost see the sixth dimension changing the fields here on the planet. I actually take a little time. I live in a city. I live in Vancouver, and I'm up on the 6th floor of an apartment building, so I can see out my window. And I sometimes just look out my window and watch the geometrical fields working right in the alley behind my apartment. It's amazing. And we're all going to become more and more visionary. And the 7th dimension is the dimension of sound, sacred sound energy that creates realities on our planet. And we're going to be hearing the sound more and more and more, the sounds of creation. It's beautiful right now. And yet at the same time, we're living in the middle of the collapse of the solid aspects of the 3rd dimension.
You have a way of articulating this that it's. I'm taking notes and actually writing down notes while you're speaking.
Well, all those things, also those things that we've created that we don't need anymore. What's happening is, from a technological point of view, technology is becoming finer and using less materials and less energy all the time. And yet at the same time, we have an overwhelming electronic technology that we're dealing with. It's less solid, but it's potentially very overwhelming. But on the other hand, it's almost stretching us into places that we've never really gone before. And so I strongly suspect that probably almost everybody listening to this show can almost feel that there's something right on the edge of where they are. And what's on the edge of all of us are these other dimensions, where there's just so much information and so much knowledge that's available to us.
How does the pineal gland fall into all of this? Are we looking at kind of an activation of that part of our body? And does that somehow play into everything you've just been talking about that we're experiencing now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the pineal gland is opening more rapidly now, day by day, hour by hour, than it ever has before in our lifetimes. And I think that probably started at the end of the calendar, because the pineal gland is totally multidimensional. It can see at the multidimensional level. And so as we see more, which many people are reporting this is happening, then that's kind of evidence that gland is open. And so one of the things, the question is, what do you do with this? All these things are going on. And I've been really careful to not pile up too many events on myself. I mean, we only have so much choice about that. There's only so much that we can cut out. But I'm even trying to make sure that if I have to do a whole bunch of things in a day, I just take just a second to reset my clock and make sure I know where I am. Because as this multidimensional field starts to become more palpable for us, then you don't necessarily know where you are. And then the positive side of this is it's really a lot of fun. It's like each one of us, even though from one point of view, okay, let's get real for a minute. Most of the people listening to the show probably have less financial freedom than they had a few years ago. All of us are experiencing various kinds of limitations just in the physical world. But at the same time, our consciousness is expanding so much that I'm finding quite a few people are telling me, well, I don't have this. I used to do this. I used to do that. You know what? I don't even care. You noticing that?
I am noticing that, actually. And in fact, it's funny that you bring that up because it seems so natural in the context of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It seems like it's supposed to happen. That's the way it's supposed to be. So we may have less money to go do all these things, but we have a greater access of traveling in other dimensions because our consciousness is at that point.
Yeah. And then I think our technologies are another thing I think that's going on here. So I think the technologies that all of us are using are really also pushing us into those realms. I just like to point that out. Because the various technological devices that people use are, like, for example, take a BlackBerry, or any kind of computer device where you're communicating with people. It's just a device so you can communicate with somebody. But to tell you the truth, you can communicate with that person without that device. because I do it all the time. I don't use electronic stuff very much, only because I don't need to.
Yeah.
I can tune in just like that here and everywhere else, And
I think you confirmed the show telepathically.
Yeah, right. And so I really am having fun watching, especially I have fun watching people between 15 and 30 years old, because they're the ones who are like the most hooked into these devices. But what's fun is I'm watching them teach themselves how to be psychic and in touch by using a device, and they're learning how to do things in 6 months that took me 30 years, if you know what I mean.
Mm.
So when I see people using a lot of this technology, I also see it a little bit from maybe a different point of view than some people do.
Yeah, there's been a lot of research about the calcification of the pineal gland and how there's certain chemicals that we ingest, and just our lifestyle and the way that we have lived over time has caused that to happen in the brain. What do you feel is the effects of that at this point? Is it kind of cracking open? Is it a little bit harder for people to connect if that's been the case? How do you see the symbolism and the reality of that?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer this in any kind of an intelligent way, because it's such a broad, complicated question. First of all, it would have to do with just exactly how we're being affected by the different frequencies that we're in. And I'm one of these people who's kind of tried to avoid getting into a lot of frequency fields. But now I live right in the middle of a big city, and everybody in my building has a computer, and everybody is connected up by means of internet and all that kind of stuff. I'm not noticing any disturbance in my field. And I haven't really lived like that before. And I have a feeling if something was going on that was negative, I have a feeling I probably know it.
Mm-hmm. What about fluoride? Fluoride and the effects of fluoride is proven to calcify the pineal gland. So, just people every day drinking water or, using toothpaste, that kind of thing. What about that?
People absolutely should do everything they can to avoid fluoride, and I always have. This is one of those things that's been obvious to me from the beginning, and you just have to work at it. There are different devices that help you remove it, and also it's an issue of what kind of water you're drinking. But there's no question. I'm not saying, Hillary, that there aren't some really negative things going on right now. Mm-hmm. But I think that people are waking up. I think a lot of people. I think people are a lot smarter now in terms of what might be good or bad for them than they were 30 years ago.
But do you feel that, and I wasn't trying to bring this up to go into a negative direction, but what I was hoping we could discuss too is how, if that has already happened to somebody physically, what are ways, or, how would somebody work on counter-affecting something like that, besides, fixing their diet and making sure they don't consume it? Do you feel that we're being aided by the frequencies that we're in, the higher dimension, this whole realm that we've been talking about this whole hour, to help to counter-affect some of the physical aspects this physical damage that's been done?
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a question nobody's ever asked me before, but I'll take a shot at it. Okay, now when we look at the issue of 9 to 10 dimensions, which is now being established scientifically as well as in books like mine, the first 3 dimensions are extended, which means they're actually solid and physical. The first dimension is the iron core crystal in the center of the planet, and the second dimension is all of the area between the iron core crystal and the surface. It's the telluric realm below the surface. And then the third dimension is, here we are on the surface of the planet, and we're solid in linear space and time. So those are the 3 extended dimensions. And now what is happening is that those other 6 dimensions, which have much finer frequencies and are extended out, they're extended out so far in space and time that we haven't been able to detect them yet, except with some mathematical formulas. And so if it's true that we are now moving into those other dimensions, and we're able to, be extended into these non-physical levels, then doesn't that make sense to you, Hillary, that some of the things that have been harmful for us, some of the chemicals and some of the frequencies and all that those things might have less of an impact on people?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, maybe there might be some period of transition for people who've never really had these kind of experiences before. They're more open, and so they may feel a little out of it, a little, crazy, a little bit, ungrounded. So I think it's absolutely a natural consequence.
Yeah, and then to be more clear, because it's not easy to be clear about this, but because I see it visually. I see those first three dimensions and their solidity, and anybody can see the center of the planet and the middle part of the planet and then the world we live in. You can visualize that. And then as you get into these higher dimensions, they're less and less physical and extended all of the time. And so really, if you look at the planet from like the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, that we have become increasingly solid and increasingly dense, and the problems with chemicals and overpopulation and all that stuff has increased greatly during a period of 250 years. That happens to be one of the underworlds. That's the planetary underworld. And now what seems to be happening is because of this extension into these higher dimensions, the solidification of the whole situation, the whole structure seems to be, I don't know if I want to say unraveling, because I don't think that this is a chaotic process. I think this is an orderly, geometrical, emotionally and mentally organized process that we're in the middle of. I don't think it's a chaotic process. But it's almost like if you think of yourself, like let's say you have too much fluoride in your body, let's just say. Well, if your body is expanding by means of a well-ordered geometry into greater and greater spaces, then that fluoride in your body wouldn't affect you at the cellular level in the same way. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something's going on at that level. I think that's another reason why all of us have to do whatever we can do right now to rest and not move too fast and give ourselves enough space. And I'm saying this from a legitimate place. Okay, my kids are all grown up and they're not running all around the house anymore. But I once raised 4 kids, and I know what it's like to go to work and have 4 kids. You know what I mean? I know what that whole thing's like. And so, I'm not Pollyanna here. But I think that all of us have to keep, I've almost been having the experience of if I can keep myself from getting too stuck in things or too over-involved so I get overamped, if you know what I mean, if I can avoid that, I can feel myself expanding. And it's in the expansion that the health is going to come and the consciousness is going to come and the DNA reorganization that needs to happen at this time, because we are becoming a new species at this time.
Well,
really
I absolutely love what you just said. I'm going to listen to this and go back and replay that. And I think everybody else listening should do the same. Is religion also evolving through the same process?
Oh, what a great question! Because so much fun. Because in the novel that I'm writing, the central characters are a Jewish male and a Catholic female character, and then their families and being in Rome and researching and blah blah blah, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I'm really, really working at an artistic level with the end of religion. And I honestly believe, Hillary, that religions as we have known them are coming to an end now. Not contact with the sacred, and not the sense of being in touch with God and being fused with higher consciousness and spiritual energies. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the structures of the world religions. And the reason I think this is what's going on is because the world religions were the creation of the national underworld. And the national underworld is the 6th underworld of 9. And the timeline on the national underworld is 3,116 BC until the end of 2011. So a whole 5,125-year cycle is now complete, and it was the development of religion on the planet, which was a very, very important part of our evolution. But now what we're doing is we're moving out of religion and we're moving into spiritual consciousness. We're moving into what I call Homo Spiritus. And I believe it's happening.
I do too.
And I think people are really confused too, because wait, what happened to God? And that's all it is what happened to your traditional definition of God.
Yeah, it's grown, it's expanded, it's evolved. We're out of time. Barbara, Clow, everybody. You can go to Barbara's website and you can find out what she's up to, handclow2012.com. The link is right here on Achieve Radio's homepage and also my website. And Barbara, thank you so much for an enlightening, beautiful hour of conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have you back.
Thank you for having me, Hillary.
Good night, everybody. Until next time, namaste.